thanks for stopping by at Twisted Art Designs. Today I want to show how I made this ICAD, and ICAD is I-C-A-D. It stands for Index Card a Day. So there's been a mixed media challenge going on for about, I think, 11 years or so. And people have gotten on the bandwagon and joined the craze of making little mixed media pieces of artwork on index cards, either 3 by 5 inches or 4 by 6 inches. There are lists of challenges, and I'm not following a challenge. I'm just doing the index cards all on my own just for fun. And I created this and I absolutely adore it. I fell in love with this piece and I just thought I would show how I did it and show you my process. So let's get started. So I'm using 3 by 5 index cards, and you can use any size you want to do this, a 3 by 5 or a 4 by 6. And I like to take an old catalog and I use that as my paint template. So what I like to do to start this background, layered background that I did, what I started with were 2 different colors of yellow. And it doesn't matter what brand of paint. I have all different brands. I just grab the color that I like. And so what I'm doing is just putting some paint on my little magazine here, my little catalog that I'm using as a palette. And I just put out 2 blobs of paint. I'm decorating on the non-striped side. And what I'm going to do is just lay this card down and squish it. It's getting squished. Just like that. And then I'm going to lay it back down and squish it again. And I'm going to keep doing that. It's mixing the paint. See how it's muddling and mixing the paint? And it's creating some fun and interest in my background. And it's also creating texture. So that's going to be my first layer, and now I'm going to set it aside and let it dry. With this paint that's left, I grab another index card and lay it down. Never waste your paint. Use it up on another index card for another project, for another day. Peel it off. It's almost like using a jelly plate. You're going to get another nice printed card, and it gives you a base to start for another card. Another project. And while I put those aside, I'm going to move on to the next step, and this is going to be using some book text and another 3 by 5 card. And I like to pull out book text of different shades. So see how this is a little bit darker because it was an older, more weathered book. I like to use text that's different sizes, so this writing is really small, this writing is big. So I like to vary it up in my little pieces. I'm using matte gel medium and a paintbrush. And so I'm going to just start covering this index card with some book text. And I like to tear the pieces like this is too perfect. So I'm going to tear it into some odd shapes, overlap them, because you want this to be really have a lot of interest, so I'm making the little pieces very small. Not too tiny that they're little microscopic scraps, but I want it to be like this, where it's really varying it up. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this card with pieces of book text. Okay, now I'm going to take my heat tool and just dry this and dry my little paint on my cards too. You can let it air dry, but I'm impatient, so I'm going to use my heat tool and dry these off. Okay, so I'm looking at these 2 cards, deciding which one I want. I actually think I'm going to use the second one that has less yellow on it. I like them both, but the less yellow looks more like my original one that I did. So what I do for the next layer, the blue layer, is I grab some turquoise blue, and I'm going to put a little dot of that down on my little paper palette here. And I'm using a baby wipe this time. And what I'm going to do with my baby wipe is to crunch it up and scrunch it up like this. So I'm going to dip that in the paint and pick up some paint, and now I'm going to go into my card and I'm going to go into the places that are white And I'm going to spounce that paint in those sections. Just like that. And see how that makes really fun texture. See how that background turned out nice and textured. So you've got the yellow and the blue. So that's what we're doing, is picking up the paint, going in and spouncing it in those spots. You can rub a little bit to make it more blended out if you want it blended in a few spots, because it's nice to vary it up. So I'm spouncing and I'm blending. And you do it until you get the desired results. And I love it. So there's my card. I think I want a little tiny bit more blue down here, so I'm going to add a little more paint and just keep going. Mixed media is all about layers. Perfect. I love it. And now I'm going to let that dry. And again, I'm a no waste girl, so there's a little bit of paint on this. Grab another blank card and scrub in some circles. And blend out what's left of that paint on that baby wipe. So it just gives you a good base for starting another card. Another tip, this is a little anchor hocking storage, glass storage bowl, and when I get baby wipes I cut them in half and I keep them in here, so they're just little tiny squares to use. That way you're not pulling out a full baby wipe and only using a little portion of it and having to throw it away. I use it like this, cut in half in this anchor hocking, and they stay nice and moist and they're easy to use. Next is the splatters. So I'm taking another color of a teal, only it's darker, and I'm going to put a blob of teal down on my little paper palette. I'm going to add a spritz of water. I'm going to spritz and wet my favorite brush that I like for doing splatters. Everybody does splatters differently. I use a Princeton Neptune No. 4 with long bristles. So now I'm just going to mix that water in, make that nice and liquidy, come over here and start adding my splatters. So I'm just tapping that brush onto my hand about middle of the brush, and it makes the splatters on the card. And I want to be sure they go off the page on the top and off the page on the bottom. And I do it until I get it the way I like it. I love splatters. Okay, so there's what the splatters look like. And now I'm going to let that dry. And then with the leftovers, I can come in and either add splatters to this little card that I am using for my leftovers, because I don't want to waste that paint. So let's do some splatters. Turn it and have them go the other way. This is just going to be another card to use another time, but when you've got the product on your brush and in front of you, use it up. Get another card going. And I'm going back and forth and making like a beautiful checkerboard splatter. That's going to be an awesome start for another card. And then with what's left down here on my palette, let's take another blank card and pick that paint up. So I do these and I let them dry, and I just keep these in a little bin on my desk, and when I'm ready to sit down and take a half hour to an hour to do an ICAD card, then I've got all these nice bases that are to start with. See? It's kind of fun and interesting. Now while that background dries, we're going to do the next step, and that is to cut out our petals. So I flip it over because I don't want to see that side. I want to just cut the petals so they turn out very random. And I'm just taking my scissors and I'm going to start cutting petals. They can be bigger, they can be smaller. You don't want them the same. You want some kind of thick, some kind of thin, some short, some long. See how I'm just cutting, I'm randomly cutting, and I'm not putting a whole lot of thought into it. I'm just creating petals of all different shapes, because flower petals in nature are not uniform, they're different. So a flower looks best if its petals are not even and equal, in my opinion. So we're going to just continue on and cut out until this whole card is completely cut out of petal shapes. So here's what it looks like, and you can save that and use that as a cool and funky, you could put that down over a card. Look at, it is the shape of a card. So if you did a background and you glued that down, look at that cool pattern. So I'm going to keep that for another card. Okay, so now you've got all these petals, and when you flip them over, you see the book text. And it's all varied in sizes and shapes of book text. That's what makes it look really fun and interesting. Now I'm going to take some Holtz Distress Ink in Squeezed Lemon and Ripe Persimmon, and I'm going to go around these pieces of petals, these petals that I've cut out. And I'm just going to color them like this with my Holtz Distress Ink. You can go all the way to the middle, you can put it down and just stamp it, you know, like stamp on it with your pad to color the whole thing solid, but I think it looks nicer if you change it up. So it's kind of light in places. See how these are light in the middle, dark on the edges? I think that adds more character to your flower, but it's your flower, so you can do it any way you want to. But that's what I'm going to do, is go around these edges, and then the persimmon is a little more orange. You can go a little bit in and vary it up, add a little orange to ones that you've already done yellow just in one spot, like maybe the spot you're going to put in the middle. So just play around with it and color your petals. And before you color all of them, pick out two that you're going to use for the leaves, that you're going to use for the leaves on the stem. You need two. So pick out two that look like stem leaves and put those two aside. Okay, for the center of my flower that's in green, I used a scrap of pattern paper that had green in it. You could use green that you find in a magazine. So if you find just a spot in a magazine, you can cut out your shape out of that green. You could use cardstock that's green. You could use, like this, pattern paper that's green, whatever you've got. And what I did for that shape is to basically, you're kind of cutting a triangle and then rounding the corners. So that shape is kind of like an off triangle with rounded corners, is the shape of your center of your flower. And I'm going to take two colors of Distress Ink, Crushed Olive, and Mowed Lawn, and I'm going to go around that piece as well. So I'm going to do the lighter color first. And then the other green, just to vary it up. When you have used more than one color, it's going to just add more dimension and depth to it. Like that. Now I'm going to take pop dots. These, you can get them at the dollar store, you can get them at your local craft store. They're used for card making, and it's for making things dimensional. And I'm going to put pop dots. I'm actually going to cut this one so it's not a circle to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm only putting it at the top of my piece that's going to be the center of the flower. And the reason I'm doing that is I want this space underneath to be blank and open. So here's my flower center, and I'm going to kind of tip it off center a little bit. And I'm gonna stick it on right about here. So it's just stuck at the top. This part is open underneath. So what I'm gonna do now is take my art glitter glue, and I'm gonna start with the biggest petals, the largest ones that I have, put a dot of art glitter glue just at the tip, and I'm gonna start adding petals. And you're gonna glue just a dot of it, and you're gonna just start layering those petals around the flower. And you want the bigger ones first. And you can overlap them, stagger them, because you want it to be really fun and interesting looking. So see what I'm doing? I'm sticking them underneath there and gluing them down, and I'm layering as I go. And I'm putting the orange part, the orange tips closest in, so that it just makes that darker color closest to the center of the flower. So there's no right or wrong here. This is just layering until you get the petals on there the way you want them to look. It's just kind of a fun thing to just stick a petal in and layer it over the others, and you start to end up with a really dimensional flower. And that's why you want to have thick and thin, big and small. Stagger them in between each other, and then it really starts to look like a real flower looks, because the petals on a real flower are staggered. And then see, they peek out from behind each other underneath. It's just really cool looking. So you just keep doing that until you get the petals the way that you want them. And you don't have to use them all. Just use however many you want to use until you like the way it looks. So now you've got your petals in place underneath the center, and you just let it dry so that they stay put. And then you're ready to move on to the next step. For the next step, I'm going to use colored pencils. These are the Uni-Posca colored pencils. You can use any colored pencils you want. And I'm just going to come in here and add a little bit more color and dimension. So I'm just coloring on that paper. And I'm not doing it everywhere. I'm just going to randomly add some more color, because I want them to pop. So I'm just adding in a little bit more yellow and a little bit more orange. Maybe go down to the tips and do the tips a little brighter. Nothing too complicated, it's just quick and simple. And then the orange, I like to put the orange close to that center. So I'm kind of just going along this edge here, and I'm just coloring that orange on just those, the parts that are closest to the center. Like that. Cute, simple. I'm going to take two colors. These are Arteza brush pens. I love these. I'm going to take a light and a little brighter one, and I'm going to go into this center, and I'm going to just add some more depth. We did the Distress Ink, but I love adding color, and I want this to be like a circle at the top. So I'm kind of just brushing in some lines, and it's making it just look a little more shapely, a little more round. So see how I'm doing that? I'm just adding some shadow, cast shadow, and dimension to that center. See how much nicer that looks? And if you don't have these supplies, use what you have. I'm just improvising and I'm just showing you what I'm using. So now I'm going to take a Posca pen, and this is in the khaki color, and I'm going to do the stem to the flower, and I'm going to just draw it in like this and go up underneath those little petals just to get a stem in place like that. For these two little ones that I saved out to be petals on the stem, I'm using two colors of, this is Stampin' Up! Ink, Garden Green and Old Olive, and this is Pigment ink. So the difference between this and Tim Holtz Distress Ink, Tim Holtz Distress Ink is a dye ink, so when you use it on paper, you put it on and you go around the edges, and within a minute or two it's dry. It's not going to rub off on your fingers, it's going to be bone dry. A pigment ink is going to stay wet, so until you heat set it or until you use an embossing powder over it, it's going to stay wet. So I'm using pigment ink because I want to emboss these leaves. You see how they're embossed and they're shiny? I love that textury look on these. So that's what I'm doing. You don't have to do this if you don't have these products. That's okay. I just wanted to show you that this is an option and it makes it more interesting. So I'm going to put it down on my paper, and well, actually I'm going to pick it up in my hand, and I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to go around those edges, and you can see it's a very, very, see if you'll, there it focuses. See how it's a very wet ink. So it stays wet, and it's going to pick up the embossing powder that I use. So I'm just kind of going in and going around and adding some of this ink, and I'm not covering the whole thing. And I actually think I'm only going to use one color. I'm going to just use that color this time. Okay, so now I'm going to put them into my little tidy tray. And I'm going to use ultra thick embossing powder over them. Ultra thick embossing powder is clear, and it's very granular. It's very thick. It's like sugar. And I'm going to use tweezers to pick it up. Pick up a petal like this. Pour a little bit of it off, and so look at it. It looks like it's super thick sugar. And now I'm going to use my heat gun to heat it up. And I don't want to do it over this one because it'll melt that one. So you just want to heat this up. You use tweezers so you don't burn yourself. That ultra thick embossing powder will melt. See how it's starting to melt? It's so fun. And then once it all melts, you stop, and this is what you have. So it's super thick, super shiny, and super textured. It looks like a leaf. So now I'm going to do that to the other one. And then you've got what's left over in your tidy tray, and you can just pour it right back in your little container. I use little plastic bags for my embossing powders and the tidy tray, and it makes it super, super easy to store them. Okay, now I'm just going to take a dot of my art glitter glue, pick out which end I want to put on the stem, and put a little dot of art glitter glue and glue the petals onto the card. And I'm only doing one little spot because then it sticks up and it looks realistic. And I love realistic. And I know that some people who do these ICADs, index card mixed medias, don't like to go off the edge. I do. I just think it looks neat, and then I'm putting mine in a little book, a little journal. I'm not trading them or anything. I'm just doing them for myself, and they're going in a journal. So I don't mind that the petals go off. I think that makes it look fun and interesting. But if you're one of those that wants to keep it contained, then just move them in a little bit. So there those are, and look at how dimensional that looks. They're sticking up, they're sticking off. Their color, I mean, they're shiny and embossed. I love that. It looks so cute. And then I'm going to let that glue dry. So now I'm going to come back in with my same green that I used in the center here, and I'm going to go over this paper the book text and color it green where it didn't get colored on these petals, on these leaves. And just to make them a little more green, and you know, same thing, just like anything else, when you have more colors, it'll look more dimensional. So then they're light and dark. Pretty. I love that. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is take a Tombow Mono drawing pen, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put in some detailing in that center part. I'm going to do some circles and some dots just to make that center look more textured and realistic. So just adding those fun little details that makes it look interesting and fun. So see how this one has those dots and circles? That's what I'm doing here, is just adding my little dots and circles. Just random and kind of in a circle pattern, so it makes like that's a round shape, and so you're wanting to follow that shape. But not too many, don't want it to look freckled. Like that. And then I like to come in with Nuvo drops. And I'm going to use 2 different colors of Nuvo drops. I love these things. This is a woodland green and apple green. And I'm going to add some dots on here with Nuvo drops. They're just like a dimensional that you dot it on and it dries, and it just looks really cool because it gives it character. I'm going to use 2 colors of green. So see what that does? How that makes those 3-dimensional dots on the center. So you've got the embossed petals. And then the last thing I'm going to do, actually there's 2 more things. I'm going to take my Tombow marker and I'm going to draw just some like crease marks on my petals. Like that. And then one last thing that I did was to take a blue colored pencil and to come up here and put some shadow behind it in blue, just to add a little bit more dimension. Just go behind those top areas in the corners. Kind of get lighter handed as you go outwards. So see how it makes that nice little cast shadow, and you can come down here and add a little under some petals, a little cast blue shadow. And I think I want just a little more yellow in my petals, so I'm going to use a Ecoline brush pen. This is the deep yellow. Let's see if it's the color I like. Yeah. And I'm going to just come in here and add a little bit of edges on some of those petals so they really stand out away from each other. They were just blending in a little too much. Ecoline is nice because they're water soluble. You can blend them out with a water brush, but once they dry, they're permanent. Let's get that one really dark. Underneath. There. Perfect. See how that just brightened it up a little bit. So there's that card, and I hope you had fun. I hope this maybe gave you some ideas, taught you a few little techniques maybe you haven't tried yet, and you could make this cute index card in a day. It didn't take very long, but boy, the results, look how cute. Cute, cute, cute. Three-dimensional flower. You could add a butterfly. You could stamp a butterfly. There's so many things you could do. You could put a saying on here about creating your own sunshine, something of that nature. So this is just a real cute little 3x5 ICAD card. Hope you had fun watching, and until next time, make art, because art soothes the heart.